YouTubers, I will put the bookmark in the book so I don't blow it away this time. So it don't get blown away. Yeah, it's warmed up quite a bit, as you can tell. Oh, hell. They're in the middle of a Bible study, and I just wanted to come out, so sorry I don't have my shirt on, but my official lights out shirt. Deal with it. This is a Project Appleseed shirt, though, more fitting to lights out anyway. Learned how to shoot Army qualification training with a Ruger 1022. If anybody ever asks you, questions always come up about what's the best survival rifle. And you could go far wrong with the Ruger. You can't go far wrong with the Ruger 1022, and you can go way far wrong from there. It's a good gun, good for a lot of things. It's quiet. You can do everything you need with it pretty much, except get in raging battles. But you know, hey, it wouldn't have been good for what they're doing here, obviously, but for squirrel hunting or tree rat hunting, not a bad gun to have around. Rabbits, being quiet, being the gray man. All right, so they just finished, and I already read this once, and I uploaded it. I thought it didn't upload. I don't know where it went. I have no idea, so I'm doing it again for the second or third time. I don't remember. Mark winced at the corny reference and left Manny standing on the corner, trying to make the Vulcan greeting sign. When Mark got back home, not only had the kids unloaded the coolers, but they'd also placed all of the firearms next to the safe. And David was putting up all of the ammo. Mark thanked the kids, then grabbed his rifle and headed to the CP. He got there a few minutes early and watched as the other members of Delta Team arrived. They all knew about Rodney, and the mood was quite somber. Mark gave them an update on his condition, and they said a prayer for him. Mark had planned to take gate duty tonight, but since he hadn't had much sleep, he decided to pull rover duty instead. Moving around would help to keep him awake. When it was 1:45, Mark noticed he was one person short. He looked at Gunny's schedule and noticed that Craig Banks was the missing guard. He remembered that Craig had promised not to be late again when they had talked before. Mark would be a little firmer with him when they talked this time. He gave out the assignments and told Joe Bagwell, who was on CP duty, to send Craig out to his team of rovers when he showed up. Mark and Paul Jensen started their rounds with Mark in the lead. Mark's mind raced from thought to thought. He thought about Rodney, then what Manny had told him about being the leader, to how they could get safely to Austin and Waco. He wondered what the sheriff wanted, what unexpected event might happen, how long the lights would be out, what all this meant to the future of Silver Hills, and to the country for that matter. There were so many questions, and so few answers. Then his mind drifted back to Rodney. Who would take care of his family if he died? Who would be the next person to get injured? How could he keep all of these people safe? How can I even... Hey, Mark. Yeah, Paul, what is it? Are we going to go around this block again? I don't know, should we? Well, we've been around it 4 times in a row. Maybe we should move on to the next one. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul. I've got a lot on my mind. Would you mind taking the lead? Mark was embarrassed that he hadn't been paying any attention. No problem, Paul responded with a smile. Mark physically followed Paul, but his mind went back to the problems troubling him. He looked at his watch after a little while and saw it was almost time for their shift to be over. He wondered where Craig was. He called Joe on the radio and was told Craig had not shown up. Mark and Paul headed over to Susan's house to see if anything was up. After walking around the house and seeing that everything looked okay, Mark decided to knock. He hated to wake Susan and her boys up, but he was worried. After a minute, he heard Susan. Who is it? Susan, it's me, Mark Turner. He heard the deadbolt turn, and then the door open. Susan stood there in her bathrobe with her AR in her hands. Any other time it would have seemed comical. Is Craig here? No, he has guard duty tonight. I know, but he never showed up. That son of a bitch. I heard him leave about 1:30. I told you not to trust him. When he gets back, I'm going to rip him a new one. Susan was as mad as when Craig had introduced himself as her husband. Mark thought for a second. Don't say anything, okay? Let's give him some rope and see if he'll hang himself. I'll talk to him later and see what he says. Okay, Mark, I'll see you later. Mark noticed that the usually full of spunk woman looked down. Are you all right? Yeah. I'm just tired. One of the boys is sick. He was up half the night puking. I just need some sleep. Maybe you should take him to Lisa. She and Doc have bigger things to worry about right now than a kid with a bug. How's Rodney? He was still alive when our shift started. I'm going to check on him as soon as we're done. If your son isn't better in a day or two, get with Lisa. Thanks, I will, Susan promised as she closed the door. Just what I need, another problem, thought Mark. He and Paul finished their shift and Mark headed back over to Doc's. He saw a light in the kitchen, so he lightly knocked on the back door. Doc answered and invited him in. How's he doing? He's still hanging in there, Doc whispered. That's a good sign, right? Yes, but we're still a long ways from being out of the woods. Even if he recovers from the wounds, we still have to worry about infections and the long-term effects of being shot. We don't know even how much nerve damage there may be in his leg, but the longer he hangs on, the better his chances. Mark nodded his head. If anything changes, can you let me know? You bet. Mark walked home. He didn't remember ever feeling this tired. Mark looked at his watch when he woke up. He couldn't believe it said 1:30 in the afternoon. He'd slept for 7 hours. When he went into the kitchen, Jess was cutting up some of the meat they'd brought home yesterday. When she saw him, she stopped. That's the latest you've slept in a long time. Yeah, I guess I was pretty tired. Have you heard anything about Rodney? Yes. Lisa came home for lunch and said his blood pressure is up a little. He's still in critical condition, but it seems he's improving. That's good. How are Donna and the boys? The boys are okay. Donna's still a basket case. Lisa's really worried about her. If Rodney doesn't make it, there's no telling how bad she might get. Hopefully we won't have to find out, Mark said thoughtfully. Do you know where Jim is? He, George, and Ralph went to see if they could get the tractor running and bring it over here. Good. I'm going to Gunny's. We've got a problem with Craig Banks. He didn't show up for guard duty last night. There's something about that man I don't like, Jess said with a sour look on her face. It's probably the way he acts, like he's God's gift to women. He's trouble, if you ask me. Mark laughed. Susan told me the same thing. Then why did she let him move into her house? She told me she did it for the boys. I guess I'd do the same thing. I'm just glad I was smart enough not to marry that big of a jerk. Thanks. I think. I didn't mean it like that, she winked, but you'd better keep an eye on him. He's a snake. We will, Mark assured her as he walked out the door. Gunny agreed with Mark about Craig. If he didn't have a good explanation for skipping out, they would remove him from guard duty. But there was little else they could do. Guard duty was, after all, voluntary. Mark also talked to the old Marine about how they could safely get to Austin and Waco and back. They hashed it around for a while and finally came up with a plan. If Mark could get all the pieces in place, they would try a trip to Austin later in the week. When he got home, Jim and Ralph were hooking the plow they had borrowed from the Christmas tree farm to Ralph's tractor. It seemed the parts Rodney had found dropped right in, and according to Ralph, the tractor had never run so smoothly. As soon as the plow was attached, George climbed on the plow and plowed the rest of the land that Jess had staked out for their garden in only a few minutes. He pulled the medium-sized blue tractor back over by the shed with a big smile on his face. We should be able to finish plowing the gardens within a week, he announced. Then we can start on the vacant lots. They should go quickly, too. That sounds good, George, Mark said, as the old farmer climbed down. At the meeting, Lisa gave an update on Rodney's condition. He was still slowly improving. Mark told everyone about Jess's suggestion to turn the Olson house into a hospital. It was approved almost unanimously. George told everyone about the tractor, and that seemed to lift everyone's spirits a little. After the meeting, Mark found Craig. Craig apologized and explained he had started on his way to guard duty but felt a migraine headache coming on. He went back to the house to take his medicine, but it kept getting worse. He would have come to let someone know, but it got so bad that it was even excruciating to move. He didn't want to wake Susan up to report in for him because he knew she was really tired from little Craig being sick. Finally, his headache started to get better and he fell asleep. Mark mentioned that Susan heard him leave but didn't hear him come back in. Craig explained that the wind had caught the door and slammed it when he left, but that he was extremely quiet when he came back. Mark wanted to believe the man, but something kept him from buying Craig's story. He checked with Susan again on the possibility that things could have happened like Craig had explained. That night on guard duty, Mark took the gate. It was quiet until 4:30, when the observation post called in a small group approaching. They had already passed the westernmost border of the subdivision and were moving slowly toward the gate. Mark cursed under his breath that they hadn't seen the intruders earlier. He called the rovers and had the CP alert the backups. The men responded quickly, but by the time they were in possession, the travelers had moved up even with the gate. Mark was surprised that he wasn't able to see them until they were very close. There were 4 of them, dressed in dark clothing, and all carrying rifles. Mark hoped they would pass on by without causing trouble. "Hello, the gate," Mark heard someone whisper. He hunkered down into the foxhole and motioned for his men to stay quiet. "Hello, the gate." The voice was a little louder this time. "I know you're in there." "Yes." "What do you want?" Mark responded, peeking over the edge of the foxhole. "We don't want any trouble. We'd just like some water if you can spare some." The man was standing in plain sight, his rifle slung across his back, and his hands were away from his body. His companions, though, were across the road covering him. Their weapons were pointing at the ground, but they were ready if anything happened. "What guarantee do I have that you won't start trouble?" Mark called. "Look, we know you have at least 10 or 12 guys watching us. We'd be idiots to start something." Mark wondered who had compromised their security measures. "Who told you that?" "No one told me. I have a night vision scope, and I saw you." Mark was relieved and concerned all at once. Relieved that he didn't have to go on a witch hunt for a blabbermouth, and concerned that someone could just sit back and watch them without their knowledge. Mark radioed that he was coming out to talk to the stranger. The two of them cautiously approached the gate and shook hands when they got there. The two men chatted for a while, and then the stranger waved his partners over to the gate. The three of them stood up, slung their weapons, and walked over to the gate. Mark could see that it was a woman and 2 teenage girls. The man introduced his family. He explained that they were making their way to a weekend cabin their family owned on the San Marcos River. Mark sent a guard to get some water from the CP, and a few minutes later he came back with a 5-gallon bucket. The family all pulled out various containers they were using for canteens and filled them. Everyone drank deeply and then refilled the bottles. The man thanked Mark and said that they needed to be on their way. Mark asked if they needed anything else, and the man said that they had plenty of food to make it to where they were going. When Mark asked the man what he'd done before the burst, he replied that he'd been a supervisor in a textile plant. Mark shook the man's hand and wished them luck. Then he watched them walk out of sight. The next morning, when the 4 men that the sheriff had invited to town arrived at the meeting, they were surprised at how many people were there. The sheriff came over to the foursome when he saw them and inquired about their injured man. Jim reported that he was still improving and that Lisa now thought he had a better than even chance to make it. The sheriff said he hoped the man pulled through and then excused himself to talk with some other people. Mark hadn't expected to see this many people. He estimated that there were at least 60 or 70, and he was now even more confused about what the sheriff wanted. A few minutes later, the meeting began. The sheriff introduced the county commissioners, the county judge, the mayors of Floresville and La Vernia, and some other dignitaries. Then he took a deep breath. "The reason we asked you all here today is to let you know some things that are going on and to get your help in deciding the best plan for our county to deal with what's happening and what may happen." The sheriff paused as a small murmur rolled through the assembly. Let me give you an overview of what we know. First, the shelter at Kelly suffered a massive riot Friday night, and over 60% of the people fled. Reports are that the airport shelter is also turning into a powder keg that'll blow at any time. We believe we'll soon see a massive amount of refugees coming through our county looking for a place to live. A loud murmur rippled through the crowd. Next, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice let us know that they are releasing all nonviolent felons. Most of the county jails in the state have already released all of their prisoners held for misdemeanors. We're concerned that while these criminals were nonviolent, they may become violent given the current state of affairs. A clamor of concerned voices crescendoed through the throng. The sheriff held his hands up. "There's one more problem I need to tell you about." The audience finally quieted. "We have unconfirmed reports, not much more than a rumor right now, that there is some kind of virus on the West Coast. No one knows if it's naturally occurring or if it is an engineered attack. However, the best information we can get indicates that it is highly contagious and that the mortality rate may be as high as 50%. A pin drop could have been heard.